Grace burst out of the apartment building barefoot, blood dripping from her split lip onto the cold pavement. Grace. Derek's voice tore through the night behind her. You don't get to run from me. She didn't look back. She couldn't. If she looked back, she'd see his face the moment he found the pills, the way his hand had trembled, not with sadness, but with fury. You've been lying to me for months, he'd screamed, holding the small packet like evidence of a crime. If you won't give me a child willingly, I'll take what's mine. That sentence still echoed in her ears as her bare feet slapped against concrete, lungs burning, legs shaking. She didn't know where she was running to. She only knew she couldn't stop. Then she turned a corner and froze. A line of black SUVs rolled to a stop, blocking the entire street. Doors opened in perfect, practiced silence. Men in dark suits formed a wall. From the center car, a tall man stepped out, unhurried, untouchable, like the night itself had been waiting for him. Kang Ji-ho. Grace didn't know his name. She didn't know that grown men twice her size lowered their eyes when he walked past. She only knew one thing, with the clarity that only fear can give a person. He is my only way out. Derek's footsteps slowed behind her. She heard him hesitate. Grace ran straight for the stranger, grabbed the lapel of his coat with both trembling hands, and pulled him down to her. Please, she whispered, breathless, desperate. Please, kiss me. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask who she was, or who was chasing her, or why her lip was bleeding. He simply kissed her, and the second his arm wrapped around her waist, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. When Ji-ho finally pulled back, he kept his arm locked firmly around her. His eyes found Derek across the street and stayed there, cold and unblinking. Touch what's mine, Ji-ho said, voice low and even, and I will bury you. Derek's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time all night, he didn't move closer.
Welcome to Afro-K Love Tales. Comment below and tell me where in the world you're watching this from. If you love Afro-Korean romance and slow burn romance that turns your heart upside down, please like, subscribe, and share the story with someone who needs a little love in their life. Now, let's begin.
Let's return to the abuse and humiliation Grace endured at Derek's hands before she finally decided to flee for her life. A few hours earlier. Grace hadn't always been running. 3 years ago, she married Derek believing love could survive anything, distance, culture, family disapproval. She followed him to Seoul with a suitcase and a heart full of hope. The hope hadn't lasted. It started small. A comment about her body. A joke about how curvy women were lucky anyone wanted them. Then it became controlled, where she went, who she spoke to, what she wore. Then it became something worse. Something with bruises that took weeks to fade. It never started with violence. Derek was careful about that, the way people who mean to stay are careful, testing the ground before he put his full weight on it. The first year, it was words. Comments about her body disguised as jokes, how lucky she was that someone like him wanted a woman built like her. She laughed it off the first few times. By the 10th, she stopped trying on dresses in front of him at all. Then it became control. Her money moved through his accounts. Her phone became something he checked. Her friends disappeared one by one, each loss wrapped in a reasonable-sounding excuse. That one's a bad influence. That one doesn't respect our marriage. Until Grace looked up one day and realized her entire world had shrunk to the size of their apartment. The silences started that year too. He could go days without speaking to her over something small, a punishment with no name, until the quiet cracked open into rage over something even smaller. She learned to apologize before she understood what she'd done wrong. The first time he hit her came in the second year. A slap, sudden and sharp, gone almost before the sound of it registered. He cried harder than she did afterward, swore it would never happen again, and Grace, starved for the softness she used to know in him, believed him. That was the part she couldn't forgive herself for, later. Believing in him. It happened again 4 months later. Then again after that, with no rhythm she could predict, no warning she could brace for. Every time, it was followed by roses, by a version of him so gentle and broken that her body forgot, even when her mind hadn't, exactly what he was capable of. By the third year, the apologies had stopped coming altogether. A shove into the edge of the kitchen counter, during an argument about a phone call he didn't like the look of, cracked a rib she wrapped herself in secret, telling the neighbors she'd fallen on the stairs. An iron, knocked from her hands mid-argument, left a burn along her forearm he didn't even pause to acknowledge. He simply told her to be more careful next time, like the wound was a mess she'd made. She stopped counting after that. Counting required hope that it would end, and Grace had none left. She learned to survive in smaller and smaller ways. Folding herself into corners of rooms. Speaking less. Agreeing faster. Rehearsing apologies for things that weren't her fault before he'd even finished taking off his shoes at the door. Then came the fight about children. Derek wanted one, had wanted one for over a year, spoke about it like a debt she owed him. Grace, terrified of bringing a child into a house where she flinched at footsteps, never told him no outright. She was too afraid of what a direct no might cost. Instead, she found a clinic 2 neighborhoods over, paid in cash so there'd be no record, and hid a small packet of pills inside a makeup bag he never touched. For months it was the only secret she had left, the only choice in her life that belonged entirely to her. It became the thing that saved her. The night he found the pills, something in the apartment shifted permanently. He didn't yell right away, which was somehow worse than yelling. He just stood in the doorway turning the packet over in his hands, studying it like a language he was only now learning to read. "How long?" he asked, too quiet. "Derek." "How long, Grace?" When she didn't answer fast enough, his face closed over completely, and for the first time in 3 years, Grace understood she was no longer looking at the man she'd married. She was looking at what had always been underneath him. "You've been lying to me for months," he said, calm in a way that terrified her more than shouting ever had. "If you won't give me a child willingly, I'll take what's mine." That sentence broke something loose in her, not fear exactly, but clarity, sudden and absolute. A door she'd been too afraid to walk through for 3 years stood wide open, and Grace understood, with a certainty that silenced every excuse she'd ever made for him, that if she didn't run tonight, she might not get another chance to try. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't leave a note. She simply ran, barefoot, bleeding from where his grip had caught her lip only moments before, out the door and into a soul night that was about to change everything. She hadn't expected to run straight into a stranger who kissed her like he meant it, and then threatened to bury the man chasing her. Derek found his voice again. "She's my wife. Whoever you are, this doesn't concern you." Jiho tilted his head slightly and asked one question, quiet and unhurried. "Is he your husband?" Grace's throat tightened. He was. That single word seemed to settle something in Jiho's chest. He murmured something too low for Grace to catch to the man beside him. Within a minute, information began flowing back just as quietly: Derek's visa status, a history of complaints filed and quietly dropped, a pattern that painted a very clear picture. Jiho faced Derek again, and this time his voice carried, sharp enough to cut through the murmuring crowd. You're on a business visa that expired 11 days ago. I could make one phone call and have you on a flight out of this country by morning. Test me. Derek's jaw worked, fists clenched, but for the first time since Grace had known him, he had nothing to say. He took a step back. Then another. Then he disappeared into the dark. Ji-ho turned to her, and for a moment his cold expression softened, just barely. You live with me now, he said. Grace blinked, pulling back slightly. I don't even know your name. Kang Ji-ho. He said it simply, like a fact rather than an introduction. I'm not going home with a stranger. That wasn't a request. Something about the way he said it, not cruel, not controlling, but absolute, like he'd already decided this was the only outcome where she stayed alive, made her stop arguing. For the first time in years, someone was making a decision for her safety, not against it. She didn't know yet if that made him different from Derek. She was about to find out. Subscribe now so you don't miss where Grace steps into Ji-ho's world for the very first time. Later that night, the penthouse doors slid open onto more space than Grace had ever lived in, floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glittering below like it belonged to someone else's life. She stood frozen in the entryway, arms wrapped around herself, still in the torn dress from hours earlier. You're safe here, Ji-ho said, shrugging off his coat and handing it to a staff member without looking at her. Eat something. Then we'll talk. Grace didn't move. Why are you doing this? He paused, like the question genuinely surprised him. Does it matter? It matters to me. For the first time, something flickered behind his eyes, not quite warmth, but close to it. You asked a stranger to kiss you because it was your only way out. I wasn't going to hand you back to the thing you were running from. That's all this is. Dinner arrived. Grace barely touched it. Ji-ho watched her from across the table, quiet, patient, the way a man watches something he's afraid to startle. Take off the dress, he said finally. Grace's fork clattered against the plate. Every muscle in her body locked. Asterisk not again. Not him either. I need to see what he did to you, Ji-ho said, reading her face instantly. His voice dropped, gentler now. Nothing else. I'll give you my word. Slowly, hands shaking, Grace let the dress fall from her shoulders. Ji-ho didn't move at first. He just looked, really looked, at the bruises blooming purple along her ribs, the faint white scar along her collarbone, the burn mark on her forearm she'd stopped trying to hide months ago. Something in his jaw tightened. His hands, when they finally reached out, were careful, checking, not touching. A doctor arrived within minutes, though Grace never saw anyone make the call. When the examination was over, 2 cracked ribs, old fractures that had healed wrong, evidence of years, not months, Ji-ho sat back down across from her. His expression had changed completely. Where there had been control, now there was something closer to fury, banked low and dangerous. No one, he said quietly, will ever touch you again. Grace didn't know why she believed him. She just did. The next day, Grace woke to sunlight instead of fear. It took her a moment to remember where she was. No sound of Derek's footsteps outside her door. No flinching at the creak of the floorboards. Just quiet, and the soft hum of the city far below. Ji-ho had assigned 2 women to the household, not guards exactly, but a presence, always nearby, always calm. He'd replaced every lock in the penthouse within hours. When Derek's first bouquet of flowers arrived at the front desk downstairs with a note tucked inside, Ji-ho burned it in front of her without reading it aloud. You don't have to see anything he sends, he told her. Ever. More letters came over the following days. Photos. A voicemail Grace refused to listen to. Each one disappeared before it ever reached her hands. Slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice it happening, Grace began sleeping through the night. A few days later, she found Jiho on the balcony one evening, staring out at nothing in particular. "Why do you care this much?" she asked, joining him at the railing. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said. "I know what fear looks like on someone who's been carrying it a long time. I've seen it before. I don't like watching it happen twice." Grace studied his profile in the dark. Twice? He didn't answer that. Instead, he turned to her. "Tomorrow, you start training." "Training?" "Self-defense. Then firearms." Grace recoiled. "I hate guns." "I know." His voice was steady, certain. "I'm not doing this to protect you. I'm doing this because I want you impossible to break." There's a difference. Something about that sentence lodged itself in her chest and stayed there. Weeks passed. Grace learned to plant her feet, to break a grip, to load a magazine with hands that no longer shook. Jiho watched every session from the sidelines, arms crossed, saying little, but she noticed the way his shoulders eased a little more each time she landed a strike clean. One evening, after a particularly hard session, she laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years, when she managed to put one of his own bodyguards flat on his back. Jiho didn't laugh often. But that night, watching her, he did. Grace caught it and froze mid-breath, struck by how different he looked when the coldness slipped, just for a second. She was starting to smile more. He was starting to let her see him. Neither of them said what that meant yet. A few days later, Han Suho stopped by the penthouse with a tablet full of documents needing Jiho's signature. He was polite to Grace, even warm, complimenting how well she'd taken to the training. But when Jiho stepped out to take a call, Grace caught Suho watching her a beat too long, not unkindly, more like he was recalculating something. "You're good for him," Suho said finally. "Genuinely. It's just." He paused, choosing his words with the care of a man who did this often. "The board isn't going to see it that way once the merger talks start. Jiho's never let anything personal touch business before. Now he has." He said it like an observation. Grace would only understand, months later, that it had been a warning aimed at himself. If you're loving Grace and Jiho's story so far, subscribe and stay close. 3 weeks later. Grace stood in front of the mirror, smoothing down a midnight blue gown she never imagined she'd own, and barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because of the dress. Because of her eyes. They didn't flinch anymore. Jiho knocked once and stepped into the doorway, and for a moment he just stood there, saying nothing at all. "What?" Grace asked, suddenly self-conscious, smoothing the fabric again. "Nothing." His voice was quieter than usual. You look like yourself tonight. Not like someone hiding." Grace felt her face warm. "Is that a compliment, Kang Jiho?" "It's a fact." He held out his arm. "Ready?" The gala was everything Grace had never experienced: chandeliers, string quartets, women in gowns that cost more than her old apartment, powerful men bowing their heads slightly whenever Jiho passed. And beside him, on his arm, was her. She could feel the whispers before she could hear the words. "Who is she?" Where did he find her? She's not from here. Grace's spine stiffened, old instincts rising, the instinct to shrink, to apologize for existing in a room like this. Jiho felt the tension in her hand and leaned down slightly. Look at me, he murmured. She did. You are the only person in this room I chose to bring. Let them wonder why. Something in her chest loosened. She lifted her chin, and for the rest of the evening, she stopped hearing the whispers at all. Until the doors burst open. Derek stormed in, disheveled, furious, security scrambling behind him. The music faltered. Every head turned. Grace. His voice cracked across the ballroom. You're still my wife. You don't get to just disappear with. That's enough. Jiho's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. He stepped forward, unhurried, and nodded once toward the far wall. Screens Grace hadn't even noticed flickered to life, one by one, filling the room with light. Hospital records. Photographs, bruises, fractures, burns, dated and time-stamped. Police reports, filed and mysteriously closed. A recorded voicemail, Derek's own voice, thick with rage, threatening exactly what he'd promised her the night she ran. The room went utterly silent. Everyone here just watched a man threaten to imprison a woman for refusing to bear his child, Jiho said, loud enough to carry to every corner. I'd like to know if anyone in this room still has questions about who she is to me. No one spoke. Derek's face drained of color as security closed in around him. Grace, he started, voice breaking now, pleading instead of raging. Please. I can change. Grace stepped forward before Jiho could answer for her. She wanted Derek to hear it from her own mouth. You had 3 years to change, she said, steady, clear, every word landing like a door closing. I'm not waiting for a fourth. Security dragged him out. The ballroom exhaled as one. Somewhere behind her, Grace heard the faint, scattered sound of applause. She turned to Jiho, breath shaking. You planned all of that. I did. You didn't tell me. I wanted to protect you from having to relive it beforehand. Later that night. The penthouse was quiet, moonlight pooling across the floor, but Grace was anything but calm. Thank you, she said, pacing near the window. Truly. But, she stopped, turned to face him. You did that without asking me. Again. Jiho, stop. Her voice shook. You didn't ask me. You never ask me. You just, handle it, and I'm supposed to just be grateful. I was protecting you. I know that's what it feels like to you. She pressed her palm to her chest, like she was trying to hold something in. But I spent 3 years being handled. I can't tell the difference anymore between someone protecting me and someone deciding for me. Can you understand that? Jiho went very still. Don't. His voice cracked, just once. Don't put me next to him. I'm not saying you're him. Her eyes were wet now. I'm saying I don't know how to trust good intentions yet. That's not your fault. But it's real. Silence stretched between them, taut and fragile. Then Jiho did something Grace had never once seen him do. He sat down slowly, dragging a hand down his face, and said, quiet and unguarded, "You're right." Grace blinked. What? You're right. He looked up at her, and for the first time, the control in his eyes had cracked wide open. I don't know how to do this any other way. I run an empire by deciding everything before anyone else can. I've never had to ask anyone's permission for anything in my life. He paused. But I don't want to be someone you have to survive, Grace. I want to be someone you choose. Every time. Grace's eyes filled before she could stop them. Then start asking, she whispered. Okay. He stood, closing the distance between them slowly, giving her every chance to step back. She didn't. Can I hold you right now? A tear slipped down her cheek as she laughed, soft and disbelieving. Yes. He wrapped his arms around her carefully, like she was something precious rather than something to control, and Grace let herself sink into it completely for the first time. Can I kiss you? He murmured against her hair. She pulled back just enough to look at him. You didn't ask the first time. The first time, you asked me. His thumb brushed her cheek. This time, I'm asking properly. Yes, she breathed. Always yes. He kissed her slowly this time, no cameras, no chaos, no desperation. Just two people who had both learned, in different ways, what it meant to finally be safe enough to choose each other. If that moment gave you butterflies, subscribe now, because the next part brings betrayal, danger, and the fight for everything Grace and Jiho just built. 6 weeks later. Grace sat on the edge of the bathroom sink, staring at the small plastic stick in her hand like it might change its answer if she looked at it long enough. 2 lines. Her hands trembled as she walked out to find Jiho at the kitchen counter, dressed for a meeting, scrolling through something on his phone. Jiho. Something in her voice made him look up immediately, phone forgotten. What's wrong? She held up the test, unable to find words yet. He went very still. Grace braced herself, for panic, for calculation, for the same look Derek used to get when he talked about children like currency. Instead, Jiho crossed the kitchen slowly and knelt in front of her, taking her free hand in both of his. What do you want? He asked quietly. Not sure. Not we'll figure out logistics. Just that, the same question he'd promised her weeks ago, asked with his whole chest. Grace felt tears slide down before she could stop them. I want this baby, she whispered. I'm terrified, but I want it. Then we're having a baby. He pressed his forehead to hers, breathing unsteady for the first time since she'd known him. Together. Every step. A few days later. The betrayal came from somewhere Grace never expected. Han Suho requested a private meeting with Grace while Jiho was out. He slid a folder across the table, his expression unreadable. You need to see this before it's too late, Suho said. Inside were documents, contracts, signatures that looked unmistakably like Jiho's, dated only days earlier. An agreement, buried in legal language, that appeared to transfer guardianship of Grace back to Derek following the completion of an upcoming business merger. Grace's stomach dropped straight through the floor. He said it was the only way to keep the merger partners happy, Suho said, voice low, almost sympathetic. I thought you deserved to know. When Jiho returned that evening, Grace was waiting, the folder trembling in her hands. What is this? Jiho's face went from confusion to alarm as he scanned the pages. Grace, I have never seen this document in my life. I didn't sign this. It has your signature. It's forged. His voice rose, urgent now, desperate for her to believe him. "Grace, look at me. I would burn this entire company to the ground before I let anyone take you anywhere. You have to believe." The lights cut out. Gunfire shattered the silence a heartbeat later. Jiho pulled Grace behind him instantly, shoving her toward the hallway as chaos erupted through the penthouse. Masked men flooded in through the service entrance, an entrance only a handful of people had access to. Soho. Grace barely had time to process the betrayal before rough hands seized her from behind, a cloth pressed hard over her mouth. The last thing she saw before the world went dark was Jiho fighting through 3 men to reach her, blood on his knuckles, screaming her name. She woke up in a cold, unfamiliar room. Derek stood over her, smiling in a way that made her stomach turn. "Did you really think that man could keep you forever?" he said softly, crouching beside the chair she was bound to. "You're mine, Grace. You always were. This time, there's no running." Grace's mind raced, terror clawing up her throat, but underneath it, something steadier. A hand instinctively pressed against her stomach, still flat, still hers, still a secret. "He doesn't know. Not yet. He can't know. You'll stay here until you give me what I've always wanted," Derek continued, pacing now. "A child. My child. And this time, no pills, no doctors, no escape." Grace said nothing. She swallowed the fear down and let it turn into something colder. "Something that I had learned, over the last 2 months, exactly how to fight back." Jiho tore through the city with a speed that terrified even his own men. Suho's betrayal had cost him hours, but a name, a location, a warehouse near the docks, that was all he needed. He led the assault himself, refusing to stay back, refusing to let anyone else be the one to reach her first. Gunfire echoed through the warehouse as Jiho's men breached the perimeter. Derek's mercenaries fell back room by room. Jiho moved through the chaos like he'd been built for exactly this moment, every shot precise, every step closing the distance between himself and the only thing that mattered. He found the room. Kicked the door open. Derek spun, gun rising, but Jiho was faster, closing the gap and slamming him against the wall before he could fire. The gun clattered away. Derek swung wildly, catching Jiho across the jaw, and for a moment the 2 men grappled, years of rage colliding in seconds. Jiho pinned him hard, fist raised, ready to end it completely. "Wait." Grace's voice cut through the room, shaking but certain. She'd freed one hand from the loosened rope, and now she stood, gripping a blade Derek had left on the table beside her. Jiho froze, fist still raised, breathing hard. "Grace." "Let me," she said quietly. He stepped back. Grace walked toward Derek, who was still pinned, still snarling threats even now. She didn't raise the knife to kill him. She raised it because 3 years of silence deserved one moment of being heard. She drove it into his side, not fatal, not meant to be, and watched him crumple, watched the fear finally shift from her body into his. "That's for every night I couldn't sleep," she said, voice breaking but steady. "That's for every bruise you told me I imagined." Police sirens wailed outside. Jiho pulled her into his arms as officers stormed the warehouse, and for the first time since the lights went out in their home, Grace let herself collapse into him completely. Subscribe now, the story isn't over yet. What happens in the hospital changes everything. Later that night, hospital. Grace lay in the hospital bed, monitors beeping steadily beside her, Jiho's hand wrapped tightly around hers, refusing to let go even for a second. The baby's fine, the doctor had confirmed an hour earlier. You're both very lucky. Jiho hadn't stopped shaking since. I need to tell you something, Grace whispered, turning to face him. He leaned closer instantly. Anything. The baby. Her voice caught. It's yours, Jiho. It's always been yours. For a long moment, he said nothing at all. Then his composure, the same composure that had never once broken, not during gunfire, not during betrayal, finally shattered completely. He pressed his forehead to her hand and cried, quiet and unguarded, the sound of a man who had spent his whole life being untouchable finally letting himself feel everything at once. Suho was found 3 days later, quietly, in a manner no one asked too many questions about. Some debts, Jiho believed, only needed to be settled once. Months later, Grace stood on the balcony where everything had shifted between them, watching the sunset bleed gold across the skyline, one hand resting on the small curve of her stomach. Jiho stepped up behind her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, chin resting against her shoulder. I have something for you, he murmured. She turned in his arms to find him holding out a small black box. Inside sat a ring, the stone dark and striking, nothing like anything she'd ever imagined for herself. He turned the ring slightly in the box, suddenly looking less certain than she'd ever seen him. I had a whole speech. I forgot all of it the second you turned around. He exhaled, almost laughing at himself. Then, quieter, will you choose me? Grace's eyes filled instantly, a smile breaking across her face. Every day, she whispered. For the rest of my life. 1 month later. Their wedding blended two worlds Grace never imagined she'd get to hold at once. Korean hanbok in the morning ceremony, vibrant Nigerian asawoke in the evening celebration, drums and traditional strings weaving together under strings of golden light. Their vows held no talk of ownership, no promises of possession. Only 3 words, spoken by both of them in turn. Trust. Respect. Partnership. Protection without control, at last. Their son arrived exactly a month later, loud and furious and perfect. Jiho held him with a gentleness Grace had never once seen from the cold, untouchable man who'd stepped out of that SUV all those months ago. Grace watched them together from the hospital bed, her husband, her son, the 2 people she loved most in the entire world, and felt something settle deep in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Real, quiet, permanent peace. If this story moved you, make sure you're subscribed for more, and drop a comment telling me which part hit you the hardest. Thank you for watching until the very end.